Welcome to 10-Minute Decade, the channel that covers world history 10 years at a time. Each episode focuses on a single country and a single decade, giving you a clear, fast, and detailed picture of how the world was changing. If you are new here, consider subscribing. New episodes are released every week. In the second decade of the 18th century, Japan emerged from a period of extraordinary stress. The Tokugawa Shogunate had survived earthquakes, volcanic eruption, famine, and political scandal, but the country remained strained. The early years of the 1710s would see attempts at reform, a tightening of intellectual and moral discipline, and rising tensions within Edo Castle itself. This decade, 1710 to 1719, is marked not by legendary revenge like the 47 Ronin, but by something far more human. A scandal that shook the inner chambers of the shogun's palace, exposed the fragility of Tokugawa authority, and revealed how even in an age of rigid order, personal desire could ignite political chaos. Today, we explore the events that shaped Japan in these 10 turbulent years. Imagine Japan in 1710, a nation unified, stable, and deeply structured, yet still recovering from the trauma of the previous decade. The Genroku brilliance had dimmed. The Hoei earthquake and the Fuji eruption were fresh in living memory. Across central Japan, the land still bore signs of ashfall, landslides, and abandoned fields. At the center of the country stood Edo, vast, crowded, and increasingly complex. The shogun, Tokugawa Ienobu, had been in power for a year. His rule marked a shift away from the rigid moralism of Tsunayoshi and toward a more practical and humane style of governance. Ienobu's approach, however, was not simply his own. Behind him stood one of the most influential Confucian scholars of the era, Arai Hakuseki. Under Hakuseki's guidance, the government focused on scholarship, administrative rationality, and easing the burdens that had weighed heavily on the population. Court rituals were revised, harsh edicts were relaxed, and the atmosphere in Edo became less oppressive than in the final years of Tsunayoshi's reign. But the problems facing Japan were not easily solved. Many domains remained financially broken. Inflation, caused by debased currency, was spreading, and throughout the archipelago, rice harvests fluctuated unpredictably. Japan entered the 1710s searching for stability, but uneasily aware that deeper problems were rising. The early years of the decade were shaped by rebuilding and reform. In 1710, Edo experienced several large fires, not unusual for a city of wooden structures packed tightly together, but devastating nonetheless. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed, displacing thousands. Each fire pushed the city deeper into debt and forced the government to reassess how rapidly Edo had expanded. Tokugawa Ienobu and Arai Hakuseki responded by strengthening administrative oversight and improving relief systems. They revised tax collection, attempted to stabilize rice prices, and worked to restore public confidence shaken by the disasters of the previous decade. Hakuseki also pushed for a re-evaluation of foreign policy. Though Japan remained under Sakoku, the strict policy of isolation, he argued that understanding global conditions was essential for national security. When Korean and Ryukyuan embassies visited Edo, Hakuseki conducted detailed interviews with their scholars, documenting information about geography, diplomacy, and economics. His studies became some of the earliest Japanese attempts to systematically understand the outside world since the mid-1600s. But even as reforms slowly took shape, nature again imposed hardship. In 1712 and 1713, regions across Japan experienced poor harvests. Pests, irregular rainfall, and lingering effects from earlier disasters created pockets of famine. Rice shortages not only strained rural villages, but also inflated prices in Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto, fueling public frustration. In 1712, after only 3 years on the throne, Tokugawa Ienobu fell gravely ill. Despite efforts to stabilize the nation, the shogun's health deteriorated rapidly. On November 12, 1712, he died, leaving behind a single heir, a young boy named Tokugawa Ietsugu, only 3 years old. Japan had faced child shoguns before, but the timing could not have been worse. With major reforms still underway, the economy unstable, and natural disasters fresh in memory, the prospect of a toddler shogun alarmed many. In practice, power shifted to a group of senior counselors and advisors, with Arai Hakuseki playing an outsized role. Hakuseki oversaw the young shogun's court, pushed forward currency reforms, and continued efforts to rationalize administration. But a government led by scholars and regents rather than warriors bred resentment. Many daimyo bristled at Hakuseki's influence, viewing him as an intellectual who meddled too deeply in matters of state. Tensions simmered beneath the surface. This fragile political balance created the perfect conditions for scandal. The most dramatic event of the decade, and one of the greatest scandals in Edo history, erupted in 1714 inside the shogun's inner palace, known as the Uku. This was the private, secluded women's quarters of Edo Castle, home to the shogun's wives, concubines, attendants, and hundreds of women who lived under strict rules. Among them was Ejima, a high-ranking lady-in-waiting to the shogun's mother. She enjoyed significant status and influence within the palace. Outside the palace walls was the world of kabuki, lively, flamboyant, and forbidden to women of the Uku. One of the era's most famous kabuki actors was Ikushima Shingiro, renowned for his charisma and his ability to attract powerful admirers. The two worlds were never meant to meet, and yet, somehow, they did. According to contemporary accounts, Ejima left the Uku on an authorized visit to the shogun's mother. But instead of returning directly, she attended a kabuki performance featuring Ikushima. What happened next remains debated. Some claim the two met privately. Others suggest it was simply an evening of forbidden enjoyment. But in the rigid moral order of Tokugawa society, even the implication of impropriety was enough to spark outrage. When Ejima returned late to the palace gates, she was immediately confronted and interrogated. Rumors exploded. Senior officials launched a sweeping investigation, determined to uncover every detail of her night out. The results shook Edo Castle. Dozens of people were punished. Ejima was exiled. Ikushima was banished from Edo. Kabuki theaters were temporarily shut down. Several families connected to the affair were stripped of rank or forced into retirement. Even the Yanagasawa clan, once one of the most powerful families of the late Tsunayoshi era, saw its influence collapse. More importantly, the scandal revealed the instability of the Regency government. The palace appeared vulnerable, discipline was in question, and the prestige of the Tokugawa family suffered. While not as violent as the Akko incident, the Ejima-Ikushima scandal had a similarly profound emotional and cultural impact. It exposed the human fragility behind the masks of authority. In the years following the scandal, Arai Hakuseki accelerated efforts to stabilize the government. He spearheaded sweeping currency reforms to counteract the debasement that had destabilized the economy since the late 17th century. Precision minting techniques were introduced. The gold and silver content of coins was increased. Trade regulations were adjusted to curb profiteering. Hakuseki believed that only a disciplined monetary system could restore the strength of the shogunate. He also attempted to limit the financial burden of sankin kotai by allowing certain daimyo reduced travel obligations, especially those hardest hit by previous earthquakes and famines. But Hakuseki's influence could not last forever. In 1716, tragedy struck. Tokugawa Ietsugu, the child shogun, died suddenly at the age of 7. His death ended the Tokugawa main line that had ruled for 3 generations. The shogunate turned to a distant cousin, Tokugawa Yoshimune of the Ki branch, one of the most capable leaders in Tokugawa history. His accession marked the beginning of a major turning point. Yoshimune's arrival brought Hakuseki's era to a close. The scholar was dismissed from government, and the new shogun prepared his own reforms for the years ahead. Tokugawa Yoshimune inherited a nation in serious trouble. Crime had risen in major cities. Rice prices were unstable. Many daimyo were deeply in debt. The shogunate's prestige had been eroded by scandals, famines, and the uncertainties of a child's reign. Yoshimune moved quickly. He ordered surveys of agricultural production. He opened channels for petitions from commoners, an unprecedented step. He pushed officials to reduce waste, cut ceremonial costs, and focus on practical governance. He encouraged frugality at every level, and even personally adopted simple clothing and restrained habits to set an example. Though Yoshimune's famous Kyoho reforms would formally begin in the 1720s, their foundations were laid in this decade as he reorganized the government, replaced ineffective administrators, and reasserted the authority of the shogun. Culturally, Japan entered a period of recalibration. The extravagance of the Genroku age had faded, replaced by a more sober, introspective mood. Literature became more satirical. Kabuki shifted toward moral themes, partly due to the fallout from the Ejima-Ikushima scandal. Merchants continued to gain influence, but Yoshimune sought to restrain their excesses. The final years of the decade saw the early stages of stability returning to Japan. Yoshimune began preparing large-scale reforms that would soon reshape the shogunate. He revised tax systems, encouraged new crops, promoted economic surveys, and restored discipline within the samurai class. Yet all of this was early groundwork. The 1710s ended not with dramatic upheaval, but with a sense of renewed purpose. The feeling that Japan was ready to move forward after decades of turmoil. Across the country, ordinary people rebuilt their lives. Farmers repaired irrigation channels. Merchants adjusted to new regulations. Samurai returned to administrative routines. Kabuki theaters reopened with stricter oversight. And Edo Castle regained a measure of stability after years of scandal and uncertainty. By 1719, the shogunate had regained control, but only by recognizing the need for profound change. The years 1710 to 1719 were years of delicate transformation. Fires and famine had strained Japan's resources. The death of Ienobu and the short reign of the child shogun Ietsugu had created dangerous political uncertainty. Arai Hakuseki's reforms had grappled bravely with currency instability and post-disaster recovery. The Ejima-Ikushima scandal had exposed the fragility of court discipline in ways that no earthquake ever could. And the accession of Tokugawa Yoshimune had set the stage for one of the most ambitious reform programs in Edo period history. If the first decade of the 1700s had tested Japan's physical foundations through earthquakes and eruption, the second decade had tested its social and political ones. The Tokugawa system endured, but not untouched. That brings us to the end of Japan, 1710 to 1719. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a comment below. It helps the channel enormously. The next episode covers Japan from 1720 to 1729, a decade defined by Tokugawa Yoshimune's sweeping Kyoho reforms, one of the most ambitious attempts to reshape Japanese society from the top down in the entire Edo period. We will see you there.